It's 1 p.m. on the East Coast, and as always, we'll go ahead and start our call on time. So, as I said, everyone's now on mute, but when the time comes for questions or comments, I'll tell you how to request unmuting so we can call on you. My name's Azer Cole. I'm one of 2 Citizen Empowerment Coordinators here at American Promise. We'll hear from Boy towards the end of the call, and welcome to another American Promise National Citizen Leader Call. This is for February 2018, and it's a call that happens on the second Saturday of each month. So really, thanks to all of you who have taken the time out of your busy weekends. I'm just going to pause 1 second and figure out. I think that should fix the background noise. So thanks for taking the time out of your busy weekends. Maybe you couldn't make it live and you're listening to this recording afterwards. Either way, you're stepping up to save our democracy, and a big thank you to all of you guys. We're honored to have an incredible guest speaker here today, Pennsylvania State Representative Jo Daley, and I'll introduce her in a moment. You know, last month we gained insight into how Nevada became the 19th state calling for an amendment to ensure that people, not money, govern. And this month we'll learn a little bit more about how Pennsylvania is vying to be the 20th. And as always, be thinking of questions to ask and press 1 on your keypad as Representative Daley is talking, so I know to call on you as we open it up for Q&A. After hearing from Representative Daley, we'll hear a grassroots victory from just a dynamic APA leader, Ellen Greenbush in Port Clinton, Ohio. And then we'll do a role play, practicing a couple of tough questions that you might get when meeting with your elected official before finishing up the call by talking about this month's action, which is writing letters to the editor focused specifically around the candidate pledge. Finally, we'll look ahead towards the National Citizen Leadership Conference, which is going to be in Washington, D.C. this summer. We've really just been so inspired to see folks stepping up across the country to start new American Promise Associations, or APAs. I'm actually going to be up in New York City next week for an APA launch in Manhattan. And in working with these groups, it's really clear how much of a resource an organized body of motivated people around this issue is for a community, with more and more people getting into action around the need to get money out of politics. So thanks everyone who's stepping up, and if you're interested in learning more about starting an APA, feel free to send me an email at azorc@americanpromise.net. It's azorc@americanpromise.net. And I just want to start by sharing this quote from Louis Brandeis, a Supreme Court Justice from 1916 to 1939, who said, "We must make our choice. We may have democracy, or we may have wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we cannot have both." I'm going to repeat that. He said, "We must make our choice. We may have democracy, or we may have wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we can't have both." And I think most everyone on this call is probably here because they don't think our democracy is working as intended, that too often the will of the people is being ignored, shouted over by the megaphones, which money has afforded the entrenched few to possess and wield power over our elected officials. People use the tools made available to them, and unfortunately for the majority of Americans, the Supreme Court has recklessly gifted those with immense wealth highly effective tools, their money, as effective mechanisms for influencing the political process. And I don't have to convince you, but the results have really been disastrous. The good news is that more and more people seem to realize it, and in the fight for a 28th Amendment to combat systemic corruption, a fight we will win, hundreds of thousands of Americans are reminding themselves what it takes to live in a working democracy, that self-governance takes vigilance. It requires active citizenship. And it's why I'm so honored to introduce our guest speaker today, State Representative Jo Daley from Pennsylvania. She's a co-sponsor of HJR 440, a bill in the Pennsylvania State Legislature which, if passed, would make Pennsylvania the 20th state calling for a constitutional amendment to address the growing role of money in our elections. Representative Daley actually came out to the recent American Promise Association launch in Narberth, Pennsylvania, an event with many of her own constituents who were all fired up about getting money out of politics and all extremely appreciative to have an elected official who was not only supportive, but is an advocate and was there in person too. It's refreshing to see politicians listening to their constituents and not their donors. So Representative Daley, I always like to introduce our volunteers to our guest speaker. Our volunteer leaders in Minnesota, Ohio, New Jersey, and elsewhere have begun having meetings with Republican members of Congress and Republican state legislators to bring them on board to support a 28th Amendment. After we hear from you, we'll hear from APA leader Ellen Greenbush, talk about the day she spent in the Ohio State House with her Republican state representative. So that's just an idea of the kind of people on this call. So I'm about to turn it over to you and everyone. As Representative Daley is talking, be thinking of questions and go ahead and press 1 on your keypad to raise your hand and I'll call on you. But with that, it's my pleasure to turn it over. Representative Daley, please go ahead and thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Azer. And hello, everyone. It's really good to be on the telephone with you today. So my name is Mary Jo Daley, and I'm in my 3rd term as a state representative in Pennsylvania. Just as background on Pennsylvania, we are a full-time General Assembly with 253 members. We have 50 senators, and we have 203 representatives. The party breakdown in our House is 122 Republicans to 81 Democrats, and in the Senate, 34 Republicans and 16 Democrats. We have a Democratic governor. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk about Citizens United, and in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to focus on 4 areas: the corrupting influence of money in politics, fundraising by candidates, the power of the majority, and thoughts on lobbying legislators. So let's start with the corrupting influence of money in politics, and I have 2 examples from my own state. Here in Pennsylvania, we have had a structural budget deficit for my entire tenure as a state rep, so I'm in my 6th year now. Republican leadership is reluctant to raise any taxes, but especially a Marcellus shale tax. When a bill appeared to have the votes needed to pass it, amendments loosening the regulatory oversight were added, which generally made that bill toxic, any of these bills toxic. So the Marcellus shale deposit in Pennsylvania covers a huge part of the state. It's one of the largest shale deposits in the country, so it's both a natural resource but also a potentially huge environmental hazard. Pennsylvania is the only state in the union with a shale deposit that does not have a severance tax. And over the past several years, there have been at least 67 bills to establish a severance tax. An Inquirer, Philadelphia Inquirer, and Pittsburgh Post-Gazette analysis of lobbying disclosure and campaign finance records since 2010 shows that the natural gas drilling companies and their industry groups have spent at least $60 million on lobbying and on political donations to legislative leaders who control the flow of bills in the Capitol and to the heads of committees that regulate their business. The second issue is that the American Legislative Exchange Council, commonly known as ALEC, is and has been a consistent influence on Pennsylvania legislators. The Center for Media and Democracy reports that ALEC is 98% funded from corporations like ExxonMobil, corporate foundations like the Charles G. Koch Charitable Foundation, or trade associations like the Pharmaceutical Industries Pharma, and sources other than legislative dues. So those funds help subsidize legislators' trips to ALEC meetings where they are wined, dined, and handed model legislation to make law in their state. Through ALEC, corporations and politicians vote on model legislation behind closed doors. And in Pennsylvania, we are often seeing ALEC-formulated legislation introduced and voted on. So the next topic I wanted to talk about is just fundraising by candidates, and I'm going to talk about my own experience. Because my interest in overturning Citizens United comes from my own observations and personal experience with the impact of money on elections. I've been involved in politics since the late 1980s, serving in local government for 20 years. And then in 1998, I ran for state representative in the same district that I now represent. I challenged the moderate Republican incumbent woman because I felt strongly that elections are important and that voters should have choices on election day. I knew that I didn't have much of a chance at actually beating the incumbent, But in 1998, money was not the barrier to deciding to run as it has become since Citizens United. I lost that race. But I ran again for my current seat in 2012, post-Citizens United and post the Republican Red Map project that brought outside money into state legislative races and helped to create the hyper-partisan environment that we see in state legislatures across the country, in particular in Pennsylvania. The need to raise money had become a barrier for people who may be highly qualified to serve in elected office, but would face opponents whose campaigns might be supported by the dark money organizations that have arisen since the Citizens United decision. In my own case, I learned to spend hours at call time dialing for dollars. I learned that the ability to raise money was viewed as an essential skill for running for office. I still spend hours dialing for dollars. But I also want to share a conversation that I had just this week with one of my colleagues who is considering a run for Congress. He has been a state representative for about 25 years and has been elected because his constituents really know him. He knocks on their doors throughout the year. He's a real policy wonk, and he represents the values of his district with dogged persistence, taking on the majority to fight against bad bills with reasoned arguments. And he talked about, when I asked him about running for Congress, he talked about how the decision had changed the way he is spending his time. So instead of focusing on policy issues, pending legislation and meeting with constituents, he's making fundraising phone calls. So he's now questioning whether this expenditure of time and is concerned about the overwhelming need to raise money and the aspect that dialing for dollars would take over his life in a run for Congress. So this is what we've come to when raising money is a bigger issue than developing meaningful policies and laws. Citizens United impacts who decides to run for office. Candidates all complain about it, but when faced with the reality that they need a well-financed campaign to hold up the threat of a better-funded opponent, they raise that money. And I believe that I strongly believe that the money in politics threatens the ability of ordinary citizens to be heard, and that it's really dangerous for our democracy. Power of the majority. The power of the majority in a legislative body cannot be underestimated. The Speaker of the House sets the calendar and which bills come up for a vote. Every bill and resolution must first be considered by a standing committee. The committee chairs have complete autonomy over which bills are brought forward in their committees. So in Pennsylvania, our Democratic House leader introduced House Resolution 440, which would join other states in overturning Citizens United. As of today, the resolution has 36 co-sponsors. They're all Democrats. The resolution was referred to the Committee on State Government, and my greatest fear is that the chair will never bring House Resolution 440 up for a vote in committee. In Pennsylvania, groups like American Promise might want to focus their lobbying activity in both the chairman's and the speaker's districts in order to force them to bring this resolution forward. In other states, American Promise must get a good understanding of exactly where the bottlenecks are and go after them. Finally, some thoughts on visiting legislators. First, don't be nervous. Remember, we are human beings and we have a job to do, and we're interested in what our constituents are thinking. So from my own view and how I like to be lobbied, I would say if you're not a constituent and I have signed on to the resolution, ask if I know your representative and would I be willing to speak to them about the issue. But first off, I should say this first, make an appointment to meet for 15 minutes in either my district or capital office. Don't be discouraged if on the day of the appointment I'm not available. Schedules often change. Meet with staff and explain the issue to them. Ask them to pass on the information. Ask for another appointment and where is the best place to meet, in the district or in the capital. Be prepared with a good elevator speech and tell me why you want to see Citizens United overturned. Tell me your own story. Know something about my committee assignments, my voting record. Let me know that you have relatives or friends in my district or that you grew up in my area or went to a school I went to. You're trying to connect with me. Be positive. Ask me to sign on as a co-sponsor for the resolution, unless I already have. Leave something with me. It does not need to be fancy, but a one-page fact sheet with the bill or the resolution number, the prime sponsor's name, your talking points and bullets, and contact information. And follow up on the visit with a thank you. Did I tell you that I was signed on as a co-sponsor? Use this as a reminder if I have not yet done so. To wrap up, let's all remember what Margaret Mead told us. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Everyone on this call is part of that small group of thoughtful, committed citizens, and you can make this group grow. You, as a voter and an advocate, can make a difference. And I cannot tell you how much I appreciate being on this call.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Representative Daley. Let's open it up for some Q&A. So again, if you've got a question, go ahead and press 1 on your keypad so I know to call on you. And when I do, just let me know where you're calling in from and go ahead with your question. It looks like Michael has his hand up. Michael, I'm going to unmute you. Where are you calling in from and what's your question? All right, Michael, might check back in with you in just a second here. Michael, are you able to ask your question and say where you're calling in from? All right, well, I've got a question for you quickly, Mary Jo. It looks like people are actually starting to raise their hands, so let's instead call on Dennis. Dennis, where are you calling in from and what's your question?
Yes, this is Dennis Latero. I'm from Fort Lee, New Jersey. And my question is, since the money in politics tends to be a bipartisan issue in general, why is it that at least in the Pennsylvania legislature, doesn't seem to be momentum on the Republican side? And what do you think would be effective in order to move momentum onto the Republican side for such an amendment, support of an amendment?
Dennis, thanks for that question. I think that you're right that there are Republicans who will sign on to this bill, and I think that visiting them in their offices would really be a way to get them. I think that individual representatives do listen and care about what their constituents think, and I think that if there are enough people engaged in Pennsylvania that will reach out to their own rep, then make an appointment, kind of do some of the things that I just talked about doing when they go to visit them. I think that we could be open, but I also think that I think in Pennsylvania, for the Republicans, it really will be necessary to make a real effort to get out to the districts of the Speaker of the House and the chair of state government. Part of the reason for that is the current Speaker of the House is going to run for governor in the May primary, and he should be really listening to what people say. I hope that helps.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that question, Dennis, and thanks for that answer. I think that's the exact right strategic way that we've got to be thinking about this, because that is the biggest challenge. It's translating this cross-partisan support among citizens into cross-partisan support, among elected officials. It looks like someone else has their hand up. April, I'm going to put you off mute. Where are you calling in from, and what's your question?
I'm in Missouri, and my question is kind of a strategy when, as you said, money is a huge problem, and a lot of people feel like it's too late, like we've lost the democracy. So my question is how to counter that despair when I'm trying to interest people in this issue, and their response is basically, it's too late. We don't have the power, and money is in charge.
It's a frightening thought to think it's too late, because I don't think that we can give up on what we have. Clearly, there's been an assault on a lot of our democracy right now, and I think that a lot of people in my area are really energized through some of the. We have a Turn Pennsylvania Blue group. We have indivisible groups. And I've seen a huge amount of energy. And I think that, to me, it looks like that energy is contagious. We also have a big group related to redistricting. So I think that American Promise should continue to reach out and have these community meetings. And, really, it's the grassroots effort, I think, of everyone really can help, because being part of the solution is, in my experience, something that's just energizing. And you find ways to treat it in a positive kind of way, because if you can engage, even if it's one person at a time, just engaging individuals who may never have been active before and letting them know that it's not that hard to be active, but the stakes are really high. It's just so important. So I think that it's one of the things I really like about American Promise is that it's working with communities, and these APAs, I think, are really terrific. The meeting that I went to in my own hometown, I think there were 40-some people at it, and it was encouraging. And so I think that doing the things like you're going to talk about, writing letters to legislators this afternoon or later in this call, I think all of these are important pieces, because you have to let your elected officials know what's important to you. They work for you. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, thanks, Mary Jo. I've got a quick question for you. And I know, just from talking with you and from others that, the schedule of, any elected official at any level is pretty hectic. There's a million different things on your plate. And, specifically to this issue, a non-binding statewide resolution is sort of a big picture thing. Can you talk about, just the process of your day-to-day schedule, how you're able to balance all of the different things that you have to focus on, and maybe talk about just the value of those constituent visits, because I'd imagine if no one's banging on your door, it'll be easy to sort of get preoccupied with immediate day-to-day tasks that you have to do for your job as well.
Sure, Azer. So my schedule is divided up between times that I'm in the Capitol in Harrisburg and times that I'm in my district office. And my time in the Capitol is not controlled by me. I serve on 5 different standing committees, and sometimes there's a lot of notice before the committees meetings, but there are times when I have overlapping committee meetings and I have to decide which one to go to or to go to parts of them. So, and that's when I said in the points that if you have an appointment in a legislator's Capitol office, they may not be able to keep it simply because their schedule interrupted their own plans. So, but the 15-minute meetings, you can find out which day legislators are in session and which days are the best to visit them. And then you can also have an option of, would it be better to visit them in their home district, because there's a little bit more flexibility in the home districts. But I can tell you from experience that having people who I represent walk into my Harrisburg office is sometimes like the best part of my whole day, because it's clear that they've made an effort to come out to see me. It's clear that they think that what they want to talk about is important. And I really appreciate the efforts that they make to do that. In my district office, I can generally afford a little bit extra time, but there are times when that schedule is interrupted also. So, I think that I have a lot of committees just because we're so deep in the minority and we have to make, a certain number on each committee. But so the Republican legislators are not as busy. Now, I am a Democrat, and to know what their schedules are like, I would think that this is an election year. They all are depending on potentially getting reelected. Legislators will always tell you they want to hear from their constituents and their voters. So I think that any of these visits or the contact are really important. And I would not, don't be shy about it. You can press for an appointment.
That makes perfect sense. It's helpful to hear it from you, someone who knows the process exactly. So again, folks, if you've got any questions, just press 1 on your keypad to let me know, and I'll be able to call on you, Michael. I'm going to see if we can get you on here again. I see you've got your hand up, and you're unmuted, Michael, so feel free to shout out where you're calling in from and ask your question. All right, I don't know what's going on there exactly, but I've got one small follow-up for you, Mary Jo. Say someone lives in your district. They've already got a dynamite state representative. What's the value of requesting a meeting with a different state representative, one they're not technically a constituent of? And if there is value, do you have any tips as to how to go about it?
So they've already talked to me, but I think that what they could do is look at who are the members of the state government committee, and that would give them a reason to go visit those people. Each committee has quite a number of Republican and Democratic representatives, and they are all going to be potentially the ones who are going to give this resolution the first vote. So I think it's worthwhile to visit members of the committee that is assigned to the state government committee. I also think it's worth it to go visit the chair of the state government committee, although he is very tough to get an appointment with. But so I think the peer pressure of visiting the members of the committee, and even the ones who have already signed on to the resolution, I mean, it's still worthwhile potentially to go and visit them, thank them for signing on, and ask them if they have ideas about or can make an introduction to another rep or talk to another rep. So, a lot of this stuff is all about connections and relationships, and, treat it the way you do in your own life. How do you make connections with people to talk about things that you want? Or we all have those instances, and I think that just using those skills that you have yourself can be really useful.
That makes a lot of sense, and it looks like we've got someone with their hand up. Sherry, hey, you're unmuted. Where are you calling in from, and what's your question?
I'm in Los Angeles, and California has already voted to repeal Citizens United. So my question is there anything that we can do to help you guys to this along?
Sherry, that's a great question. And, I'm not really sure how you can help. I don't know, Azer, have you all thought about that with your network of APAs across the country?
Yeah, sure. I think that's the exact right question to ask. There was that successful statewide ballot initiative in California, not long ago at all. And that's a huge victory. And part of the follow-up, from that really momentous display of public will is, having those meetings with your members of Congress, many of whom may already be co-sponsors of federal legislation, but likely not all of them. In fact, I can guarantee it, not all of them are actively championing this issue, are actively, writing op-eds on the importance of systemically getting money out of politics, talking about the idea of a constitutional amendment. So, there are more things to do. It's fantastic that that statewide ballot initiative has been won, and the real value of that now is that constituents can go to their elected officials, at all levels of government and say, this is really important to me and to the majority of Californians. Is there something more that you can do that you're not currently doing? So that would be my advice.
Azer, I have another thought.
Yep.
because there's a National Council on State Legislators that has an annual meeting, which happens to be in Los Angeles this year. I think it's in July or August. There's also a national group of environmental legislators that meets the weekend before. And, you know, it's an opportunity for legislators from all 50 states to attend. And you might want to use that as a platform where your California elected officials can reach out or, you know, have some information sessions on this movement, because and they could talk about their own experience and maybe even team up with members, elected officials from other states that have already passed it. I think, you know, it's a huge meeting and there are all kinds of topics at it, and you know, people are coming in from all over. So I think those are two national meetings of state legislators that could be potentially useful. And I'd be happy to provide Azer, you know, you with more of the information about those meetings if you'd like.
Yeah, please do. Thanks. It looks like we've got time for one more question. I'm going to call on Christine. Hey, Christine, where are you calling in from, and what's your question?
Hi, Azer. It's Christine. I'm from San Pedro, California, and thank you, Rep. Daley, for being on the call. This touches on your earlier question, Azer, regarding our representative's schedule, kind of day-to-day schedule. I had learned that at the federal level, there is quite a bit of time spent on the dialing for dollars. I wasn't as aware that at the state level that was necessary as well. And so I wonder, Representative Daley, how much time is given to that, and what are your feelings in that part of your job?
Oh, absolutely. That's a really good question. So I happen to represent a district that is a majority of Democrats, and the Republicans have not fielded a really strong opponent against me. I do not spend as much time as some of my colleagues do on raising money, but I still have to raise it because you never know where, if you want to keep your seat, if you like what you're doing, if you're doing a good job, clearly you want to get reelected. So you just need to always have money sitting there just because you don't know what's coming. And I think that's one of the issues with the Citizens United. But I have colleagues who will spend a significant, who are in more, you know, their seats, they're going to get a stronger challenge than I do, and they spend a significant amount of time making phone calls. I mean, some of them have a campaign person who is with them all the time, and they'll make, and who drives for them so that they can sit on the phone while they're in the car making phone calls. I have not had to face that kind of a schedule, but when I listen to some of these folks talk about it, that, you know, they're raising, you know, $500,000 to $1 million for a state representative race. I mean, it's incredible to me, but, you know, those are and it depends on what media market they're in, and it depends on the kind of challenge they're facing. But, you know, those are really big numbers. And so we all talk about how much money we're raising. And part of my money that I raise, I try to help colleagues who are in more difficult districts than I am. So I think that it is at the state level. I mean, we've got real gerrymandering issues even at our state level, although we're trying to get through the federal level right now. But it's tough. It's tough.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, everyone, for the really fantastic, insightful questions. And Representative Daley, a huge thanks to you for being on the call and sharing your insights.
Oh, you're welcome. It was really fun. Thank you.
Glad to hear. Yep, of course. So before we get to our grassroots victory, I just want to start with some actions taken recently, sort of an update. Last year, APA members had 17 meetings with elected officials or their staff, And so far in 2018 already, APA members have had already 13 meetings with elected officials or their staff. Similarly, there were 26 media pieces published last year, and so far already this year there have been 10 media pieces published. So we're really making incredible progress, and we want to make sure we know about your meetings with elected officials and your media pieces published so we can include them in our total next month, as well as amplify their impacts on social media and other channels. So if you think you've had a meeting with an elected official or their staff, or had a media piece published that we might not know about, go ahead and shoot me an email at azorc@americanpromise.net. It's azorc@americanpromise.net. And the growth we're seeing in these numbers is really exciting, and I think indicative of more and more people stepping up and getting involved. So it's now my pleasure to kick it over to Ellen Greenbush, APA leader in Port Clinton, Ohio, doing just the kind of citizen-led work Representative Daley just described as so impactful. Her APA launched last November and has been firing on all cylinders, so it's my pleasure to introduce Ellen. Hey Ellen, how are you?
Hey, great. Good afternoon. I'm Ellen Greenbush from Port Clinton, Ohio, home of the first and only American Promise group in Ohio. Our group is really excited about working with Senator Sherrod Brown. We had a meeting with his aide recently, and I was thrilled with what I heard, including the possibility of the senator writing an op-ed for us after the midterm elections. But that isn't really what I wanted to talk about today. What I wanted to talk about is my struggle to raise awareness about the need for change about money in politics with my Republican state representative. I had coffee with him here in Port Clinton. It was an amiable conversation about money and politics, the pressure felt in fundraising, and pushback from corporations and interest groups when he did not vote to their liking. We agreed in a big picture kind of way, but he's a cautious person, and I didn't expect action from him. My goal was just to get another meeting. And I was surprised when he suggested I spend a day at the State House in Columbus. When I met with him in Columbus, he definitely was in legislator mode. The openness of the previous meeting was gone. He immediately told me he didn't like the language of the present resolution in Ohio, especially because it didn't talk about unions as a source of money. The resolution doesn't have any Republican co-sponsors, and he will not sign a general candidate pledge because he wants to know exactly what is in a subsequent piece of legislation. Furthermore, he is not in favor of a constitutional convention. Our conversation confirmed my suspicions that he would not be a leader for our cause, but American Promise urges me not to give up on him because with persistence, people can change. But then I spent the rest of the day with him and his legislative aide, attending committee meetings and a House session and explaining American Promise to people. I also popped into my state senator's office and got about 20 minutes with his senior aide. So what did I learn? Well, I have a few areas of agreement with my representative about other issues, and that'll be a way to continue correspondence and conversation with him. I'll continue to inform him about our local American Promise activities. It's worth it because in time he could be a yes vote. I also think I need to be on the lookout for positive things to acknowledge about him. He was very generous with his time, and perhaps he sees some truth in our issue. Generally speaking, the effects of Citizen United and the 28th Amendment are not on state Republican radar. To be fair, my timing was awful. They were working on redistricting, but I also assumed a basic level of knowledge and found it missing. That allowed me to see the importance of our work. If the basic level of knowledge isn't there, where will they get it if not from us? their constituents. We need to get people aware of and talking about this problem in the state before legislation will go anywhere. That's clearly our job, and I love the help that I'm getting from American Promise to help us get there. Still, I was surprised the talk about political PACs is nonchalant. Has money raised this way become so commonplace that no one's concerned? The other thing I learned is that all the work of Ohio legislation is done in committees, very similarly to what Rep. Daley just talked about. And unlike the national scene, we do need to regularly interact with state legislators on committees. We need to interact with them early and often, because we don't just want our legislators to support a 28th Amendment or advocate for a 28th Amendment. We want them to be leaders and eventually champions for a 28th Amendment. It was suggested to me that I need to reach out to Democratic sponsors of the resolution who should try to get Republicans on board. And I just found out at the end of this week that that piece of legislation, H.R. 74, is going to have hearings in committee on Monday. So I did take the opportunity and contacted the chair of that particular committee. And finally, everyone treated me and responded to me as a constituent with interest and respect. So all in all, it was a productive day, and now I'm ready for a meeting with my state senator. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ellen. Your group's really been in serious action, successfully publishing letters to the editors, conducting a stamp-a-thon, outreach meeting, and most impressively, I think, as you just described, meeting with your Republican state representative and working on that really important relationship. We're going to talk about these meetings more in just a second, but if there's anyone on the call who's not yet in an APA and is curious about learning more about one, send me an email at azerc@americanpromise.net. So now we're going to practice answering some tough questions surrounding the candidate pledge. More and more people have begun approaching candidates for public office about signing the candidate pledge, and it's good to practice answering questions that will likely come up. So here's the first question, and as I'm asking it, press 2. Go ahead and press 2 on your keypad if you want to give it an answer. And in this scenario, I'm going to be playing the candidate. You've just asked me to sign the pledge. And here's my first question for you. Well, thanks for explaining the pledge to me. I think I'm with you on the concept of it, but I don't really understand what I can do about this. Isn't this something that the courts have to decide? That's my question to you, and if someone wants to take a crack at it, a brave volunteer, go ahead and raise your hand. You can press 2 on your keypad. It looks like we've got someone with their hand up. Laura Nittmeyer. I'm going to call on you. Laura, you're unmuted. Where are you calling in from, and how would you answer that question?
Hi there, Azer. I'm from New Jersey. Well, there are a number of things, Representative Azer, that you can do. The first thing I think is just your leadership in the area is a huge thing, because other members of your party will be interested for sure, and also other members of your state as well. I think because 80% or more than 80% of the population of the entire U.S. would really like to see the situation change, that any member that stands up and discusses this issue in public is going to attract tremendous attention and support. So as a candidate that's running in 2018, it just couldn't be a better situation for you.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. And this is Azer talking, not hypothetical candidate Azer. And I think the question that I asked, I didn't really understand the process of a constitutional amendment. I thought, well, this is a problem that the Supreme Court created. This seems like something that the Supreme Court should fix. They certainly could overturn a couple of these decisions. But we're worried about what we can control, and we're working towards a constitutional amendment. So it might be useful to explain to elected officials or candidates for public office just the process of how do we get a constitutional amendment. Legislation has to pass through both houses in Congress, then has to be ratified by 3/4 of the state legislators. That's something that I'm sure not all elected officials know, but they certainly should, particularly when talking specifically about this issue. Laura, if it's all right, I'd love to ask you another question. And the question is, who else from my state has signed this pledge, and what can I expect, do you think, in terms of publicity if I do sign?
Well, a number of candidates have already signed this pledge. A number of them actually are at the local level. So we see that candidates that are really from your political party that are challengers in the upcoming election see this as a differentiating issue. So I think for sure other members of your party will be in co-support of you. I think that the other side, though, is even more important, because in order to solve our country's problems, members from both sides are necessary, and this is because you have such a good reputation in working across the aisle. You've already collaborated on so many other issues, on health care, on the tax reform bill, things that your constituents really are happy to have. And because of that collaboration, you already know other members of Congress that will continue to work with you on this issue again. This is another issue where they would love to work with you.
Yep, thanks for that, Laura. And you can also mention to them that, on the American Promise website under the Candidate Pledge Campaign tab, there's a list of all of the publicly signed candidates who have signed the pledge, which will continue to be updated. And you can tell them, we'll be amplifying your signature of this pledge via social media. We'll be letting, the hundreds of thousands of folks who care about this issue across the country, know that here's a candidate who's really going to take this seriously. That's another thing that it will certainly fall on receptive ears. I've got one more question. I'm going to call on someone else, but the question is, and this again, maybe I don't fully understand the process here, but my question is, well, thanks for the question, or thanks for talking about this, but I'm running for state senate. Isn't this a federal issue? And I'm going to call on Hank. Hank, you're unmuted. Where are you calling in from, and how would you respond to this question I just asked you?
It's Hank Mayers, and I'm in Lansing, Michigan. And let's see if I wasn't listening as sharp as I was. You asked me whether or not this is just really a federal issue?
Yeah, so I'm running for state senate, and I don't really understand why my office has anything to do with this whole constitutional amendment business.
Right. Well, there are a couple of reasons why it involves you. Even if we're so removed as to pursuing a ballot measure and not a legislative resolution, there still is the step where the convention occurs. If we were to do a if we passed our resolution or we passed an initiative and 2/3 of the states vote for a Section 5 convention, and that goes and Congress doesn't do, there still is representation that is necessary to those conventions. And you could be, in fact, a member to that. But that's kind of a process point of view. I think the other is, that's probably more immediate, is that the pressures of fundraising in our state has escalated dramatically. The average cost of a campaign, even for re-election, is in the multiple millions for a state senator. So what we're really talking about is an effort to begin to reduce the financial demand, which translates into literally distractions from performing your legislative duties, and putting great pressures on you to respond in kind for who's ever contributed to you, and maybe in situations where you're not comfortable to start with. So there's both a process point of view. You will play a role in the future, but today the role really is to reduce the burden of campaign fundraising.
Yeah, thanks, Hank. I think that was really sort of thoroughly explained. And, sort of what I'm getting at with these questions is, you're probably going to know more about this than the elected official or candidate you're talking to. And they're going to ask you questions which don't really make sense or sort of indicate, a lack of knowledge on, everything from day-to-day impacts of money in politics, but probably more commonly just procedural stuff, being able to talk to them and say, this is both a federal issue and a state issue. This is what has to happen in Congress, and this is how the state legislature fits in terms of ratifying an amendment or proposing a constitutional convention. Knowing the process and the ins and outs is really, really integral for these meetings. So thanks you guys for volunteering. I know it's always, these role plays are always a little bit tough, but I think they're really helpful and just all about, practicing so we're prepared when we're in those meetings. So again, thank you guys. And I'm now really excited to turn it over to Waboy, the other fantastic citizen empowerment coordinator, who's going to lead us through this month's action, an action directly related to this type of meeting. Hey, Waboy.
Hi, Azer. For this month's action, we're focused on generating support for the American Promise 28th Amendment candidate pledge through well-written letters to the editor. So by championing this candidate pledge in the media, our elected officials and candidates will more likely respond to the political will that we as citizens create. It's up to us to encourage those in office and those running to announce their support for 28th Amendment, overturning Citizens United. With the 2018 election only 9 months away, I know it seems like a long time, but it's coming up quickly. This is the time to drum up widespread support around this campaign by celebrating the pledge in our letters to the editor and urging all political candidates to sign it. The pledge is an opportunity to begin and continue our dialogue with elected officials on the 28th Amendment and can be a really great gateway into developing a productive relationship. So let's go over how you write your letter to the editor, or LTE, with a specific focus on the pledge. So the first thing is, I don't want you to think that writing a letter to the editor urging one specific candidate to sign the pledge. You want to have meetings with specific candidates asking them to sign the pledge, but not a letter to the editor on a specific candidate. So you want to urge all candidates running for Congress and the state legislature, or even small local elections, to sign the pledge. The next thing you want to do is review the text of the American Promise Pledge. It's available on our website at americanpromise.net/pledge. That's americanpromise.net/pledge. And remember, the links to all of this information will be available to you in the action sheet that will be emailed to you on Monday. The next thing you want to do is to find a local newspaper that you're going to write to and learn what's required to submit a letter to the editor. For example, you would Google the name of the paper along with the phrase "letter to the editor submission criteria." And be sure to take notes of how many words they allow, how a letter is submitted, and all that good stuff. The next thing you're going to do is, if you're writing to a larger paper, find an article that provides a really great angle for the 28th Amendment. If you're writing to a smaller paper, you might not have to reference an article, but just write in a way that makes it clear to local readers why they should be interested and care about this issue. Next, you're going to read a few of these letters to the editor in the newspaper you're writing to see how they're started and the general tone. Step 6 is the fun part, writing your letter. Be sure to follow the guidelines newspaper provided, but when you're writing your letter, be really clear to express your values and experiences that move you to work to have a government run by people and not money. And again, the way that we are going to win this amendment and get champions around this amendment is by really humanizing this issue. So connect all of your values and experiences to this work so that you can really make it clear why having a government run by people and not money is really important to you. You can refer to the laser talk that will be included in this month's action sheet for ideas. Once you finish writing your letter and send it, celebrate. You're on the path to creating champions in Congress, the media, and the general public for the 28th Amendment. And of course, once your letter is published, be sure to let us know at waboyg@americanpromise.net. That's W-A-M as in mom, B as in boy, U as in umbrella, I as in indigo, G as in go, at americanpromise.net. I'm so excited to see how we're mobilizing this pledge this year and how we're going to make an impact in the 28th Amendment movement. Thanks, Azer, and thank you, everybody. Back to you.
Yep, thanks, Waboya. And I would just add, there will be a recap email sent out Monday to all of you about this call. The email you should have received on Friday if you'd RSVP'd for the call before Friday includes the action sheet as well if you want to, get that out sooner than Monday. But thanks, Waboya. Before we sign off, we just want everyone to know about our second National Citizen Leadership Conference to be held in Washington, D.C. from June 22nd to 25th this summer. The conference really is an opportunity for us as citizen leaders to gather together to discuss our common goal of winning the 28th Amendment and then actually go to the Hill to meet with our members of Congress and their staff on Monday the 25th. In 2016, we hosted this conference for the first time, and over 300 citizen leaders from 40 states with 60 speakers and panelists on hand. This year's conference is going to be even better and even bigger. We're going to have some fantastic guest speakers, including Bill Moyers, Cenk Uygur, Nina Turner, just to name a few, and most importantly, we'll have amazing citizen leaders, you guys, from all across the nation, all in one place working to advance the 28th Amendment. So again, the conference is going to be from June 22nd to 25th. On the 25th, there's going to be that Citizen Lobby Day on Capitol Hill, where we won't be anonymously flooding our member of Congress's emails or secretly funneling our requests to them through offshore back channels. No, we'll be at their office door, prepared and professional, ready to discuss real-world problems of money in politics, which we know and see affecting every single American. So registration for this conference is scheduled to open up next week, so keep your eyes peeled out for this info. And if you'd like more information about the conference or have any questions, feel free to shoot Waboya or myself an email. You can also email nclc, just the letters, nclc at americanpromise.net, or call the main office phone number, which is 978-254-6275. It's 978-254-6275. It looks like it's about 1:58 here on the East Coast. Not going to keep you over time. We'll get wrapped up just a minute or two early, it looks like. As always, it's really an honor to be with you guys all. And I look forward to talking with you on the next monthly call, which is going to be March 10th at the same time. So with that, have a fantastic weekend, everyone, and I'll talk to you guys soon. All right. Thanks, you guys. Everyone is unmuted if you want to say a quick goodbye to your fellow citizen leaders.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.